Whistling Pines wasn't kind to those who stood out. Eleanor Mason knew this truth in her bones as she moved through town like a shadow, her gaze fixed to the ground. The whispers followed her anyway. 26 years old and still unwed, with that limp and those quiet ways. The townsfolk had long decided her fate. Spinsterhood was written in the stars. But fate has strange ways of unraveling expectations. When Thomas Reid rode in on that copper mare, his scarred face telling stories his lips kept sealed, something shifted in the air. The town averted their eyes. Eleanor couldn't look away. What happens when two souls, marked by life's cruelties, recognize something in each other that everyone else has missed? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The bell above Miller's General Store chimed as Eleanor arranged the last of the canned peaches on the shelf. Morning light filtered through dusty windows, catching motes that danced in golden beams. She worked methodically, each item in its place, a small order in a world that had never made sense to her. "Eleanor, be a dear and check the ledger for our flour order," called Mrs. Miller from behind the counter. The elderly woman's voice was warm honey, one of the few sounds in Whistling Pines that didn't make Eleanor flinch. "Yes, ma'am." Eleanor limped toward the counter, her right leg dragging slightly against the wooden floorboards. The leather ledger was worn at the edges, filled with her careful handwriting, perhaps the only place her presence was permanently marked in this town. Her fingers traced the most recent entry. "We're due for 20 pounds on Thursday." The words were soft, barely audible above the creak of the ceiling fan. Mrs. Miller nodded, squinting through wire-rimmed spectacles. "You've such a head for numbers. Don't know what I'd do without you." A faint smile touched Eleanor's lips before disappearing like morning dew. Compliments were rare treasures to be stored away, examined in private when doubt crept too close. The accident happened when she was 8. A wagon wheel, a moment's distraction, bones that never healed quite right. Her mother hadn't survived the accident at all. Eleanor sometimes wondered if she'd truly survived it either, or if she'd been surviving it every day since. The boarding room above the store wasn't much. A narrow bed, a wash basin, a small table where she took her meals alone. But it was clean and quiet, and Mrs. Miller charged less rent than she should. Another kindness Eleanor tallied in her mental ledger of debts she could never repay. "Did you hear?" Mrs. Miller's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper as a customer left. "There's a stranger in town. Rode in yesterday on the prettiest copper mare you ever did see." Eleanor nodded, having heard the whispers already. Whistling Pines rarely saw newcomers who weren't just passing through. "Sarah from the dress shop says he's got a face that would curdle milk," Mrs. Miller continued, arranging penny candy in glass jars. "Burned something terrible. War injury, they're saying." Eleanor's hands stilled on the ledger. Her throat tightened with an emotion she couldn't name, something between sympathy and a strange, guilty relief that someone else might know what it was to be seen as damaged. "Imagine living with such a burden," Mrs. Miller sighed, not noticing how Eleanor's knuckles had whitened around the edge of the counter. The bell chimed again. Eleanor looked up, momentarily forgetting to keep her gaze lowered as she trained herself to do. Through the window, she caught a glimpse of a tall figure leading a copper mare down Main Street. Even from a distance, she could see how people crossed to the other side, the way mothers pulled children closer. The man's hat was pulled low, but not low enough to hide what fire had done to the left side of his face. Angry red welts twisted from jaw to temple, disappearing beneath the brim of his hat. Eleanor watched as Sheriff Parker approached the stranger, one hand resting casually on his holster. The conversation appeared civil enough. The sheriff even smiled once, but the wariness never left his stance. "Best get back to those deliveries for the Wilsons," Mrs. Miller said, following Eleanor's gaze. "And Eleanor? Try not to walk past the saloon. Those cowboys from the Double Cross have been in town since yesterday." Eleanor nodded, remembering all too well her last encounter with drunken cowboys who thought a limping woman was somehow fair game for cruel jokes. She gathered the packages, checked them against her list in the ledger, and slipped out the side door. As she stepped into the alley, Eleanor couldn't help but glance toward Main Street again. The stranger was gone, but the image of his scarred face remained. In this town where appearances were currency and hers had always left her bankrupt, she wondered what it would be like to wear your wounds where everyone could see them, rather than hiding them deep inside where they festered in the dark. Thomas Reid knew exactly what awaited him at the Whistling Pines boarding house. He'd seen the same expressions in every town since the fire: the initial shock, the poorly disguised revulsion, then the deliberate avoidance of eye contact. He was a walking reminder of how quickly life could steal a man's dignity. "Rooms $2 a night," the innkeeper said, eyes fixed on the register book. "Meals extra." Thomas placed the coins on the counter. "Just the room." The man glanced up, then quickly away. "Second floor, end of the hall. Bathrooms shared." Thomas nodded, taking the key with scarred fingers. His saddlebag hung heavy from his shoulder, containing everything he owned in this world. Among his sparse belongings, wrapped in a handkerchief, lay a tarnished cavalry medal he hadn't looked at in years. The room was Spartan: narrow bed, wash basin, chair that had seen better days. Thomas set his bag down and moved to the window. From this vantage, he could see most of Main Street, including the general store. A young woman with chestnut hair had just emerged from its side door, packages balanced in her arms. He noticed her careful gait, the slight drag of her right leg. A commotion below drew his attention. His mare, Penny, was being agitated by a group of boys who'd started poking her with sticks through the hitching post rails. Thomas was down the stairs and out the door in seconds. "Step away from my horse." His voice wasn't raised, but something in its timbre made the boys freeze. "We wasn't doing nothing," the tallest boy protested, though the stick was still in his hand. Thomas approached slowly, aware of passers-by stopping to watch. He kept his scarred side angled away out of habit. "She's a warhorse. Sudden movements spook her." The mare nickered as Thomas ran a gentle hand down her neck. "Easy, Penny," he murmured. "What happened to your face, mister?" the smallest boy asked, earning a shove from his friend. Thomas met the child's gaze. "Fire," he said simply. "War has a way of marking a man." The innkeeper appeared, shooing the boys away before addressing Thomas without quite looking at him. "Best stable her at Colton's down the street. Can't have her tied up here all day." Thomas nodded, untying Penny's reins. As he led her down the street, he felt the weight of stairs heavier than any pack he'd carried through battle. Colton's livery was quiet, smelling of hay and leather. A grizzled man emerged from the shadows, eyeing Thomas and the mare. "Fine animal," he said, admiring Penny without sparing a glance at Thomas's scars. "Army trained?" "Yes, sir. 5th Cavalry." The old man nodded. "Thought so. Got the look. 2 bits a day, includes feed." As Thomas handed over the coins, a voice called from the entrance. "Reid. Thought that was you." Sheriff Parker strode forward, hand extended. Thomas took it, surprised at the genuine welcome. "Been a few years," Parker said. "Last saw you at Fort Laramie, wasn't it?" "Yes, sir. Before the fire." Parker nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Heard you rode with Captain Hayes after that. Tough outfit." "For a time." The sheriff adjusted his hat. "Well, you're welcome in Whistling Pines, though folks here take time warming to strangers." He lowered his voice. "Especially ones that look different." Thomas's mouth twitched in what might have been a smile on a face less damaged. "Hadn't noticed. Need work while you're here?" "Wouldn't turn it down." Colton could use help. His boy left for Denver last spring. Parker glanced at the livery owner, who gave a non-committal shrug that wasn't quite a refusal. As the sheriff left, Thomas began unsaddling Penny, the familiar routine soothing. From the livery entrance, he caught another glimpse of the limping woman, now making her way carefully across the street. There was something in her downcast posture that struck him, a deliberate attempt at invisibility he recognized all too well. While the world stared at his scars, hers seemed to be the kind folks pretended not to see. Thomas wasn't sure which was worse. Evening settled over Whistling Pines like a sigh. Eleanor climbed the narrow stairs to her room, each step a negotiation with her stubborn leg. The day's fatigue clung to her shoulders, but there was comfort in routine: washing up, changing into her nightdress, lighting the lamp on her small table. This hour belonged to her alone. From beneath her bed, she withdrew a leather portfolio tied with string. Inside lay dozens of sketches, sweeping landscapes, towering mountains, endless prairies she'd never seen but imagined from descriptions in the dog-eared novels Mrs. Miller lent her. Her fingers, nimble despite the day's work, moved the charcoal in practice strokes. Tonight's drawing took shape, a copper mare with an arched neck and intelligent eyes. Eleanor paused, considering whether to include the rider. The stranger's face would be difficult to capture, not because of his scars, but because of what she'd glimpsed beneath them. A dignity that refused to cower. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Eleanor? It's Sarah." Eleanor hastily covered her drawing. "Come in." Sarah Bennett entered with a rustle of skirts and the scent of lavender. At 23, the seamstress's daughter was Eleanor's only real friend in Whistling Pines, though their lives could hardly be more different. "I brought the ribbon you wanted," Sarah said, placing a package on the table. Her eyes drifted to the partially concealed drawing. "Still dreaming of faraway places?" Eleanor smiled faintly. "It passes the time." Speaking of time, Sarah perched on the edge of the bed, eyes bright with excitement. "Have you heard about the Founders' Day celebration? 6 weeks away, and Father says it'll be the biggest yet." Eleanor's smile faltered. Town celebrations meant crowds, dancing, and inevitable reminders of what she could never be. "Mother's making my dress already," Sarah continued, oblivious to Eleanor's discomfort. "You should let her make you something too. Blues to match your eyes." "Who would I dress for?" Eleanor's question held no self-pity, only pragmatism. Sarah squeezed her hand. "For yourself. Besides," she lowered her voice dramatically, "have you seen the newcomer? Scars aside, there's something about him." Heat crept up Eleanor's neck. "Mrs. Miller mentioned him. They're calling him the Beast of Whistling Pines at the saloon," Sarah confided. "But Sheriff Parker vouched for him. War hero, apparently." Eleanor's fingers drifted to her drawing. "People are cruel when they're afraid of differences." Sarah's expression softened with understanding. "Yes, they are." She stood, smoothing her skirts. "Think about the dress. For me." After Sarah left, Eleanor uncovered her drawing, staring at the incomplete rider. "War hero." The words settled strangely in her chest. Across town, Thomas sat on his boarding house bed, lamp burning low as he cleaned tack with practiced hands. Colton had hired him that afternoon, grudgingly at first, then with growing appreciation as Thomas demonstrated his way with troubled horses. On the wall outside his window, a notice caught his eye. Newly posted on the town's bulletin board, it announced the upcoming Founders' Day celebration, a week of festivities culminating in a grand social at the town hall. Thomas had no interest in such affairs. He'd learned long ago that his presence made people uncomfortable at best, frightened at worst. But something about this town made him reluctant to simply pass through as he had so many others. Perhaps it was Sheriff Parker's unexpected welcome. Or Colton's gruff but fair manner once he'd seen Thomas's skill with horses. Or maybe, though he scarcely admitted it to himself, it was the glimpse of a chestnut-haired woman whose eyes, unlike every other person in town, hadn't immediately darted away from his scars the one time their gazes had briefly met across the street. Thomas extinguished his lamp. Tomorrow would bring what it would. For tonight, it was enough to have a job, a roof, and the distant possibility that Whistling Pines might prove different from the other towns where he'd sought but never found a place to belong. 3 days passed before Mrs. Miller handed Eleanor the supply list with an apologetic smile. "Colton needs these items for the livery. Would you mind taking the list over? His new hand might need help selecting the right things." Eleanor's stomach tightened. "I could prepare the order for pickup." "Nonsense. The exercise will do you good." Mrs. Miller's tone was kind but firm. "Besides, I need to know what Colton plans for that new stall before Founders' Day." The midday sun beat down as Eleanor made her way toward the livery, the supply list clutched in her hand. Her heart thudded against her ribs. She'd seen Thomas Reid from a distance several times now, leading horses to water, repairing a fence behind the livery, tipping his hat to Sheriff Parker. Always she'd kept her distance. The livery was cool and dim after the bright street. Eleanor paused in the doorway, allowing her eyes to adjust. The scent of hay and horses filled her nostrils. "Mr. Colton?" she called softly. Movement from the back stall drew her attention. Not Colton's stooped figure, but a taller, broader silhouette. "He's gone to the smithy," a deep voice replied. "Can I help you?" Eleanor's fingers tightened around the paper. "I have a supply list from Miller's." Thomas Reid stepped into the light, wiping his hands on a rag. The scars on the left side of his face were even more pronounced up close, a landscape of healed wounds that pulled his mouth into a slight grimace on that side. But his eyes, a clear, steady gray, held no self-consciousness. "I can take it," he said, extending his hand. Eleanor stepped forward, suddenly hyper-aware of her uneven gait. Her ankle turned slightly on a loose floorboard. She stumbled, and the list fluttered from her grasp, pages separating as they scattered across the hay-strewn floor. "I'm sorry," she whispered, mortification burning her cheeks as she bent awkwardly to retrieve them. "No harm done." Thomas knelt beside her, reaching for the same paper she was. Their fingers brushed and Eleanor froze. She looked up, finding his face inches from hers. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Eleanor waited for the inevitable, his gaze dropping to her leg, the flash of pity or discomfort she'd grown accustomed to seeing. It never came. Thomas simply held her gaze, and something shifted in his expression, a recognition that made her breath catch. "You work at Miller's?" he said, not a question but a statement. Eleanor nodded, finding her voice. "I'm Eleanor Mason." "Thomas Reid." He gathered the remaining papers, rising to his feet before offering his hand to help her up. After a moment's hesitation, she took it. His palm was calloused but warm, the grip gentle yet strong enough to steady her. "Thank you," she murmured, pulling her hand away once standing. "Mrs. Miller would like to know about the stall renovations before Founder's Day." Thomas studied the list. "We're expanding 3 stalls for the visitors' horses." He looked up, his expression unreadable. "Will you be attending the festivities?" The question caught Eleanor off guard. No one had ever specifically asked about her attendance at town events, her presence or absence equally unremarkable. "I help Mrs. Miller with the store's booth," she replied carefully. Thomas nodded, still holding her gaze with that same steady look that made her feel strangely seen. "Pretty's got nothing to do with the eyes," he said suddenly, his voice low. "It's in the way you carry your pain." Eleanor stared, speechless. Before she could find words, the livery door opened, flooding the space with sunlight as Colton returned. "Miss Mason," the older man greeted. "Got our list, I see." Eleanor nodded, already backing toward the door. "Mr. Reid has it. Good day." She turned, fleeing into the street, her heart pounding with an unfamiliar rhythm. His words echoed in her mind, stirring something dormant and dangerous, something that felt uncomfortably like hope. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. Thomas Reid's words had unsettled something deep within her, a foundation she'd carefully built over years of disappointment. She lit her lamp and pulled out the wooden chest from beneath her bed where she kept her few treasures. Beneath sketches and hair ribbons lay a tattered book of fairy tales, its binding worn from countless readings. Her mother had read from it nightly before the accident. Afterward, Eleanor had clung to the stories, desperate for their promises of transformation and happy endings. But at 16, reality had crushed those childish hopes. She opened the book to Beauty and the Beast, where several pages were torn out, ripped in a moment of bitter clarity after Benjamin Porter had asked her to the harvest dance only to laugh with his friends about courting damaged goods. Pretty's got nothing to do with the eyes. What did Thomas Reid know about it? His scars were visible, yes, but he was still whole in all the ways that mattered. He walked without assistance, commanded respect from men like Sheriff Parker, had a skill valued in any frontier town. Eleanor closed the book, her throat tight. She'd learned long ago not to mistake kindness for something more. Thomas Reid would be like all the others, eventually seeing only her limitations, never possibilities. The next morning, a wagon arrived at Miller's general store laden with supplies. Eleanor was arranging penny candy when Mrs. Miller called from the storeroom. "Eleanor, come see what Mr. Reid has delivered." Reluctantly, Eleanor made her way to the back. There stood Thomas, unloading sacks of flour with ease despite their weight. He straightened as she entered, tipping his hat. "Miss Mason." She nodded stiffly, avoiding his eyes. "Mr. Reid." "Thomas brought everything on the list himself," Mrs. Miller said, beaming. "Saved Colton the trip." "That was thoughtful," Eleanor murmured, reaching for her ledger to check the items. "No trouble," Thomas replied. "Had to come to town anyway." As Eleanor verified the delivery, she felt his gaze on her, steady and unrushing. It made her hands tremble slightly as she marked each item. "These prices seem high," remarked a voice from the doorway. James Wilson, son of the town's wealthiest rancher, leaned against the frame, eyeing Thomas with poorly disguised distaste. "Standard rates, Mr. Wilson," Mrs. Miller replied smoothly. "For standard goods, perhaps." Wilson's gaze slid to Thomas. "Though I'd question the quality of anything handled by some, well, let's say, questionable characters." Eleanor saw Thomas's jaw tighten, but his expression remained impassive. "If you've concerns about the merchandise," Mrs. Miller said, her voice taking on a rare edge, "you're welcome to shop elsewhere." Wilson laughed. "Now, Mrs. Miller, just looking out for your business." His eyes drifted to Eleanor. "Though I see you still employ charity cases." Heat flushed Eleanor's face. The old familiar shame washed over her as she stared at the ledger, willing herself invisible. "Miss Mason," Thomas's voice cut through her humiliation, "would you show me where to store these coffee beans?" Eleanor looked up, startled. Thomas's expression revealed nothing, but his eyes held something fierce, not pity, but something that looked strangely like respect. "Of course," she managed, indicating a shelf. As they moved away from Wilson, Thomas murmured, "Some men measure their worth by diminishing others." Eleanor's hands trembled as she arranged the coffee tins. "I'm accustomed to it." "That doesn't make it right." When they finished, Thomas tipped his hat to Mrs. Miller. "I'll bring the rest tomorrow." At the door, he paused, turning to Eleanor. "Sheriff Parker mentioned you know the town's history better than most. I'd be obliged if you might share some of it. For a newcomer's benefit." Before Eleanor could respond, he was gone, leaving her with an invitation that felt dangerously like a lifeline. 2 days passed before Eleanor found the courage to accept Thomas's invitation. She stood in the town square at dusk, clutching a rolled parchment to her chest, wondering if he would come. The old map of Whistling Pines had been a gift from Mrs. Miller years ago, the first person who'd shown interest in Eleanor's passion for local history. The evening air held the day's warmth as shadows lengthened across the square. Eleanor checked the courthouse clock again, telling herself she would wait 5 more minutes before retreating to the safety of her room. "Miss Mason." She turned to find Thomas approaching, hat in hand. He'd trimmed his beard and wore a clean shirt despite the day's labor evident in his calloused hands. "I feared you might not come," she admitted softly. "I gave my word." He nodded to the parchment. "What have you brought?" Eleanor unrolled the map on a nearby bench. Whistling Pines in 1853, when it was just a trading post. Her finger traced the faded lines, her voice growing stronger. "The town got its name from the sound the wind makes through the pine grove north of here." Thomas leaned closer, his interest appearing genuine. "When did settlers arrive?" "The first families came in 57. Eleanor pointed to locations on the map. "Wilson's, Porter's, Miller's. The railroad reached us in 68 and the town nearly doubled." As she spoke, her limp and his scars seemed to fade into irrelevance. Thomas asked thoughtful questions, his gray eyes alert and engaged. Eleanor found herself sharing stories she'd never told anyone, legends of lost gold shipments, the winter 3 families survived in a single cabin, the time traveling preachers accidentally burned down the first schoolhouse. "You should have been a teacher," Thomas remarked. Eleanor laughed softly. "No one would entrust their children to someone like me." The words slipped out before she could catch them. An awkward silence fell. "Someone like you," Thomas repeated carefully. "You mean someone knowledgeable, articulate, and passionate about history?" Eleanor looked away. "You know what I mean." "I do." His voice held no pity. People fear what reminds them of their own fragility. From across the square, Eleanor noticed Mrs. Halloway and her daughter Charlotte staring at them, heads bent in whispered conversation. She stiffened, suddenly aware of how this meeting might appear to others. Thomas followed her gaze, his expression hardening slightly. Does their opinion matter so much? When you've lived your whole life in one place, Eleanor said quietly, everyone's opinion shapes your world. Thomas was silent for a moment. I was a rancher before the war. Had a small spread in Wyoming. After this, he gestured to his scarred face, I couldn't go back. Not because the land wouldn't have me, but because I couldn't bear to see the change in how people looked at me. Eleanor studied him, surprised by his candor. Where will you go after Whistling Pines? He shrugged. Hadn't thought that far ahead. For now, Colton needs the help. As twilight deepened around them, Eleanor carefully rolled the map. I should return to the store. Thomas nodded, standing. May I walk with you? It was a simple courtesy, yet no man had ever offered it before. Eleanor hesitated, then nodded. They walked in companionable silence until reaching Miller's. At the door, Thomas said, Thank you for the history lesson, Miss Mason. Eleanor, she corrected impulsively. You may call me Eleanor. A smile touched the unscarred side of his mouth. Then I'm Thomas to you. After he left, Eleanor watched his tall figure disappear down the street. Something had shifted between them, a fragile bridge forming across the chasms of their separate loneliness. Later that night, checking inventory by lamplight, Eleanor found a small package that hadn't been there before. Unwrapping the cloth revealed a delicately carved wooden horse, its lines capturing the spirit of Thomas's copper mare. No note accompanied it, but none was needed. The wooden horse found a home on Eleanor's bedside table, the last thing she saw before extinguishing her lamp each night and the first thing to greet her each morning. She never mentioned it to Thomas, but her secret smiles when he visited the store told him his gift had been well received. A week of unusually heavy spring rain transformed the streets of Whistling Pines into muddy rivers. On the worst day, Eleanor watched from the store window as Thomas helped unload a wagon of supplies, heedless of the downpour soaking him to the skin. That man works harder than two ordinary men, Mrs. Miller observed, following Eleanor's gaze. Colton says he's never had the livery running so well. Eleanor nodded, trying to appear only casually interested. But when Thomas entered the store later that afternoon, rainwater dripping from his hat brim, her heart quickened treacherously. Delivery for Miller's, he announced, setting a crate of canned goods on the counter. Road from Carson is washed out. Marshall had to take the long route. Mrs. Miller clucked her tongue. You're drenched. Eleanor, fetch a towel from the back. When Eleanor returned, Mrs. Miller was filling a list of items needed at the livery. Since you're here, might as well take these back with you. And Eleanor can help carry, her legs troubling her less than my arthritis today. Eleanor shot her employer a look of mingled horror and suspicion. Mrs. Miller's matchmaking was about as subtle as a branding iron. Outside, the rain had intensified. Thomas held the store's awning edge up so Eleanor could duck under, the crate of supplies balanced against her hip. We'll be swimming before we reach the livery, she murmured. Thomas grinned, the expression transforming his scarred face. Fastest routes down Elm. Ready to run for it? Eleanor stared at him. No one ever suggested she run anywhere. Before she could protest, he'd taken the crate from her and cocked his head toward the street. On 3. Something reckless and wonderful rose in Eleanor's chest. 1, she began. 2, he continued. 3, they finished together. They dashed into the downpour, Eleanor's limp more pronounced but forgotten in the exhilaration of the moment. Water plastered her hair to her face and soaked through her shoes. Thomas kept pace beside her, careful not to outrun her despite his longer stride. Halfway to the livery, the sky opened further. Lightning flashed overhead, followed by a deafening crack of thunder. Thomas pointed to the abandoned stagecoach station. In there. They ducked into the dilapidated building, breathless and dripping. Laughter bubbled up from Eleanor's chest, an unfamiliar but welcome sensation. I haven't run like that since. She stopped, the memory of her childhood accident suddenly sharp. Thomas set down the crate, understanding in his eyes. You run just fine. He shrugged out of his wet coat, draping it over a broken chair. The station's roof leaked in places, but a corner near the old ticket counter remained dry. They settled there, listening to the storm rage outside. Might be a while, Thomas observed. Eleanor nodded, suddenly conscious of her sodden appearance. She smoothed her wet hair back from her face, acutely aware of their solitude. The fire happened outside Vicksburg, Thomas said abruptly. We were clearing a farmhouse. I went back for a man when the roof collapsed. His fingers traced the scars unconsciously. Woke up 2 weeks later looking like this. Eleanor's throat tightened. My mother and I were returning from visiting her sister. The wagon wheel broke on a steep hill. I remember falling, then nothing until I woke up in the doctor's house. She swallowed hard. Mother never woke up. Thomas's hand found hers in the dim light. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. Some wounds time doesn't heal. Just teaches us to carry. Their fingers remained intertwined as the storm slowly passed. Neither spoke of it when they finally continued to the livery, but something had shifted, a deepening of trust through shared pain. In town, they were observed returning together, both soaking wet. By evening, whispers circulated that the cripple and the beast found each other. The days following the rainstorm brought subtle changes. Thomas found reasons to visit Miller's general store almost daily, a forgotten order, a question about upcoming deliveries, an offer to repair the loose step at the side entrance. Eleanor found herself watching the door, anticipating his arrival with a warmth that both thrilled and frightened her. You're humming, Sarah remarked one afternoon as she helped Eleanor arrange a new shipment of fabrics. I haven't heard you hum since we were girls. Eleanor's hand stilled. Was I? Sarah studied her friend's face. It's him, isn't it? The scarred man. His name is Thomas, Eleanor corrected softly. And no, it's nothing like that. Eleanor Mason, you're blushing. Sarah's eyes widened. Does he court you? Of course not. Eleanor returned to folding fabric with determined focus. We're merely acquaintances. Acquaintances, Sarah repeated skeptically. Well, be careful. People are talking. People always talk, Eleanor replied, but her stomach knotted at the thought of becoming the center of town gossip. My father says he drinks alone at the saloon every night, Sarah persisted. And Mrs. Porter swears she heard him shouting in his sleep at the boarding house. Eleanor bit her lip. Thomas had mentioned nightmares, not uncommon for veterans, but she'd never seen him touch a drop of whiskey. Not everyone is as they appear, she said finally. Sarah squeezed her hand. I just worry for you. Men like that, with those kinds of scars, they carry more than what you can see. Later that afternoon, Thomas arrived with a repaired chair for the store's porch. Eleanor was alone, Mrs. Miller having gone to visit her sister. Where would you like it? He asked, hat in hand. By the window, please. Eleanor gestured, noticing dirt on his sleeve. You've been gardening? Thomas set the chair down. Colton's wife wanted a vegetable patch behind the livery. I offered to dig it. That was kind. He shrugged. Keeps my hands busy. An awkward silence fell. Eleanor busied herself arranging ledgers behind the counter, aware of Thomas watching her. I should check the storeroom inventory, she said finally, needing distance from his unsettling presence. I could help, he offered. Those flour sacks looked heavy. Eleanor hesitated, then nodded. The storeroom was cooler and dimmer than the main shop. Thomas followed her inside, ducking his head beneath the low door frame. The flour goes against that wall, she directed, pointing to a stack of sacks. As Thomas moved them, his sleeve caught on a nail, tearing the fabric and revealing a glimpse of scarred skin extending down his arm. You're hurt, Eleanor said without thinking. Old wounds, he replied, quickly adjusting his sleeve. Eleanor stepped closer. The fire, it wasn't just your face. Thomas stilled. No. Burned down my right side to the hip. The vulnerability in his admission made her brave. It doesn't diminish you. Their eyes met in the dim light. Something unspoken passed between them, recognition, understanding, a shared weight momentarily lifted. Thomas's gaze dropped to the counter where several of Eleanor's sketches lay partially concealed beneath inventory lists. Before she could stop him, he'd lifted one, a detailed rendering of the mountain range visible from the town's northern edge. "You drew this?" Wonder filled his voice. Eleanor nodded, mortified at having her private passion discovered. "It's extraordinary." He studied the drawing with genuine appreciation. "Have you seen these mountains up close?" "No," she admitted. "I've never left Whistling Pines." Thomas examined her other sketches, landscapes, buildings, a particularly fine rendering of his mare, Penny. "You have a gift." Eleanor felt naked beneath his gaze, her hidden self suddenly exposed. "They're just drawings." "No," Thomas said firmly. "They're visions. The world as you see it." He carefully set the sketches down. "Thank you for showing me." "I didn't exactly." "Still. Thank you." When their eyes met again, Eleanor felt something shift irreversibly. For the first time in years, she laughed, a genuine, unguarded sound that startled them both with its joy. Outside the store window, Sheriff Parker observed their interaction with a furrowed brow before continuing down the street toward the saloon. The natural order of Whistling Pines was being disrupted, and not everyone would stand for it as Founders Day approached. Whistling Pines transformed. Colorful bunting appeared on storefronts, and planning committees met with increasing urgency. Eleanor had successfully avoided involvement until Mrs. Halloway cornered her at the store. "We need someone with a steady hand to design the banner," the woman announced, barely meeting Eleanor's eyes. "Mrs. Miller suggested you." Eleanor hesitated. Public contributions meant public scrutiny. "I'm not sure." "Everyone must do their part," Mrs. Halloway interrupted. "The committee meets tomorrow at the town hall. 2:00. After the woman left, Mrs. Miller emerged from the storeroom with a knowing smile. "About time they recognized your talents." "Or they're desperate," Eleanor replied. "Nonsense. I've shown Martha your drawings." Eleanor stared at her employer. "You what?" "Not the personal ones," Mrs. Miller assured her. "Just the landscape of Main Street." She was quite impressed, though she'd never admit it. The next afternoon found Eleanor perched awkwardly on a chair in the town hall, sketching design options for the Founders Day banner while committee members deliberated nearby. She'd almost finished when a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. Thomas stood with hat in hand, looking uncomfortable as every head turned his way. "Mr. Reid," Mayor Porter greeted stiffly. "What brings you here?" "Sheriff Parker mentioned you needed help hanging the platform bunting," Thomas replied. "I offered my services." Mrs. Halloway whispered something to Mrs. Wilson, whose eyes widened as she glanced between Thomas and Eleanor. Mayor Porter cleared his throat. "Very well. The supplies are out back." As Thomas turned to leave, his eyes met Eleanor's. He gave her a small nod, and she found herself returning it without thought. "Miss Mason," Mrs. Halloway's sharp voice snapped her attention back. "We need those designs completed today." Eleanor bent over her work, aware of the speculative glances now being cast her way. Outside the window, she could see Thomas carrying lumber toward the town square. An hour later, her designs approved with reluctant praise, Eleanor gathered her materials. The committee had moved on to discussing the dancing arrangements, barely noticing as she slipped out. Instead of returning to the store, she found herself walking toward the square where Thomas worked alone, securing supports for the platform where the band would play. "Need another pair of hands?" she called softly. Thomas looked up, surprise giving way to a warm expression that transformed his scarred features. "Always." Eleanor set down her satchel and took the nails he offered. Working together in companionable silence, they completed in an hour what might have taken him all afternoon. "Your design?" Thomas asked, nodding toward her sketches peeking from the satchel. Eleanor nodded. "They actually approved it." "Why wouldn't they? You've got real talent." A passing couple stared openly at them working side by side. The woman whispered something and her companion laughed. Eleanor stiffened. Thomas noticed. "Does it bother you? Being seen with me?" "No," she answered honestly. "It's being seen at all that's unfamiliar." A farmer approached the platform, seeking directions to the feed store. When he addressed his questions solely to Thomas, deliberately ignoring Eleanor, something unexpected happened. "Miss Mason knows this town better than anyone," Thomas said. "She's the one to ask." The farmer looked startled, then reluctantly turned to Eleanor. She provided clear directions, her voice stronger than usual. After the man left, Thomas smiled. "Well done." "For giving directions?" "For being seen." As they finished the platform, Mayor Porter's wife approached with refreshments for the workers, but offered the tray only to Eleanor. "None for Mr. Reid?" Eleanor asked, surprising herself with her boldness. Mrs. Porter flushed. "I didn't think." "Thank you, but I'm fine, ma'am," Thomas interjected smoothly, sparing the woman further discomfort. When she hurried away, Eleanor handed Thomas her own cup of lemonade. That wasn't fair. He accepted it, their fingers brushing. Life rarely is. As evening approached, they walked together toward Miller's, ignoring the stares of townsfolk. "There's a spot north of town," Thomas said suddenly. "You can see the mountains you've drawn. Maybe someday." "I'd like that," Eleanor replied before he could finish, the possibility of someday unfurling between them like a banner against the sunset. The letter arrived for Thomas 1 week before Founder's Day. Eleanor was checking inventory near the post office counter when Mr. Simmons, the postmaster, called Thomas's name with evident reluctance. "Something for you." Thomas, who had been purchasing supplies across the street, approached cautiously. The envelope bore official markings and a military seal. As he took it, his expression shuddered, the openness Eleanor had grown accustomed to vanishing behind a mask of guarded neutrality. "Thank you," he said stiffly, tucking the letter into his coat without opening it. Eleanor pretended absorption in her ledger, but her attention remained fixed on Thomas as he left the post office. Through the window, she watched him stop beneath an oak tree, staring at the envelope as if it might contain a viper. That afternoon, he didn't appear at Miller's as had become his custom. The next morning, when Eleanor delivered baking supplies to the boarding house, Mrs. Timmins shook her head. That scarred fellow was up half the night. Pacing, mumbling, nearly frightened the life out of Mr. Pearson when he came in late. Eleanor bit her lip. "Is he unwell? Who knows with his kind?" Mrs. Timmins sniffed. "War does things to men. Makes them unpredictable." For 3 days, Thomas seemed to vanish from Whistling Pines. Colton reported he was working, but taking his meals alone and speaking little. Eleanor found herself watching the door of the store with increasing anxiety, telling herself it was merely concern for an acquaintance. "You're wearing a path in my floor," Mrs. Miller observed on the third afternoon. Eleanor stilled, unaware she'd been pacing. "I'm just restless with all the Founder's Day preparations." Mrs. Miller's wise eyes saw too much. "And it has nothing to do with a certain gentleman's absence." Before Eleanor could deny it, the bell above the door chimed. Thomas entered, looking haggard. His clothes were clean but rumpled, as if he'd slept in them, and a new tension lined his face. "Mr. Reid," Mrs. Miller greeted warmly. "We've missed your visits." Thomas nodded, removing his hat. "Been busy at the livery." His eyes found Eleanor's, then quickly shifted away. "Need some supplies." As Eleanor gathered his items, she sensed his withdrawal. The comfortable ease they developed had vanished, replaced by a cautious formality that stung more than she cared to admit. "5 pounds of coffee, was it?" she asked, hoping to draw him out. "Just 2. He placed exact coins on the counter. "Won't be needing much." Eleanor's hand faltered as she wrapped the purchase. "Are you leaving Whistling Pines?" The question hung between them. Mrs. Miller discreetly retreated to the storeroom, leaving them alone. Thomas rubbed a hand across his jaw. "Might be best." "Because of the letter?" The words escaped before Eleanor could stop them. His gaze sharpened. "You saw. Only that you received one. Nothing more." Thomas was silent for a long moment. "It's from my former commander. They're assembling a special detachment. Men with experience like mine." "For what purpose?" "Nothing good." His voice hardened. "I thought I'd left that life behind." Eleanor carefully tied string around his package. "Will you go?" "Been considering it." He wouldn't meet her eyes. Less complicated than staying. The unspoken meaning struck her like a physical blow. Less complicated than whatever was growing between them. I see, she said softly. Thomas took the package, their fingers not quite touching. Eleanor. The store door opened, admitting Mrs. Porter and her daughters. Thomas stepped back, his expression closing once more. Thank you, Miss Mason, he said formally, settling his hat on his head. Good day. Eleanor watched him leave, a hollow feeling spreading in her chest. That evening, she sat at her small table, staring at the wooden carved horse. For the first time since her mother's death, she allowed herself to cry, silent tears for possibilities that had never truly existed. In his boarding house room, Thomas sat on the edge of his bed, the letter crumpled in his scarred hand as he struggled between the pull of duty and the unexpected anchor of a pair of blue eyes that had looked at his scars and somehow seen the man beneath. The decision came to Thomas in the dead of night, as most important decisions had throughout his life. He would stay, at least long enough to explain himself properly to Eleanor. She deserved that much. Dawn found him at the livery earlier than usual, working with methodical intensity that kept thoughts at bay. By midday, his hands were raw and his shirt soaked with sweat. The left side of his face throbbed as it always did when he pushed himself too hard, phantom pain from nerves damaged beyond repair. You're driving yourself into the ground, son, Colton observed, offering a canteen of water. Whatever demon you're wrestling, it won't be beaten with a pitchfork and shovel. Thomas accepted the water. Just earning my keep. You've earned it 3 times over this morning alone. The older man studied him. That girl at Miller's, she asks about you when she delivers our orders. Thomas looked away. Nothing there to concern yourself with. Didn't say it was my concern. Colton spat a stream of tobacco juice. Just observed a fact. After Colton left, Thomas reached into his pocket for the small tin of burned salve he carried from his army days. The scarred skin on his face and neck tightened painfully in the heat, sometimes cracking if he didn't apply the medicine regularly. As he struggled to reach a spot near his collar, he cursed softly. Need help with that? He turned sharply to find Eleanor standing in the livery entrance, a package in her arms. Delivery from Mrs. Miller, she explained, her voice carefully neutral. Supplies you ordered. Thomas hastily pocketed the tin. Thank you. Just set it down. Instead, Eleanor approached him, her limp more pronounced today. Your skin is bleeding. Thomas touched his neck, fingers coming away with a smear of red. Happens sometimes. Eleanor set the package down and gestured to the tin in his pocket. Let me. It's not necessary. Please. The single word held more than a simple request. After a moment's hesitation, Thomas handed her the tin. Eleanor guided him to a hay bale in the shade, positioning herself before him. With gentle fingers, she applied the salve to the irritated skin at his collar, then worked upward along his jaw and cheek. The fire wasn't your fault, she said quietly. Thomas stilled. How would you know that? Because I know you now. Her fingers continued their careful ministrations. And I know what it looks like when someone carries guilt that isn't theirs to bear. I was their sergeant, Thomas said, the words emerging from a place long sealed. Responsible for bringing them home. How many did you save? Lost 3. And nearly became the 4th casualty yourself. Eleanor's hand rested briefly against his unscarred cheek. That's not failure, Thomas. Her touch anchored him to the present, drawing him away from smoke-filled memories. I dream about them. The ones I couldn't reach. I dream about my mother, Eleanor confessed. Calling for me from the wagon. I can never get to her in time. The shared vulnerability hung in the air between them. Thomas caught her hand as she withdrew it from his face. My family disowned me after the accident, Eleanor continued, her voice barely audible. My father remarried, moved to California. Said my presence was a constant reminder of his loss. I was 13. Thomas's grip tightened on her hand. Then he was a fool. As are those who see only your scars, she replied. They sat in silence, connected by touch and shared pain. Finally, Thomas spoke. I'm not answering the letter. My war is finished. Relief flickered across Eleanor's face. What will you do? Sit. For now. His thumb traced circles on her palm. See what Whistling Pines has to offer. The intimacy of the moment was broken by a horse's neigh from outside. Eleanor withdrew her hand reluctantly and stood. Founder's Day is in 3 days, she said. There's a social in the evening. Would you, that is? I'll be there, Thomas promised. If you save me a dance. A blush colored her cheeks. I don't dance. My leg. Then we'll sit together, he amended, and watch others make fools of themselves. Eleanor's smile transformed her face. I'd like that. As she left, Thomas touched his scarred cheek where the cooling salve eased his pain. For the first time in years, he felt something dangerously close to hope taking root in ground he'd thought forever barren. Founder's Day dawned bright and clear. Eleanor hung the completed banner across Main Street alongside other volunteers, watching with quiet pride as it unfurled in the morning breeze. Her design, showing the town's growth from trading post to thriving community, had been rendered in vibrant colors by her own hand. Well done, Miss Mason, Mayor Porter called from below. Finest banner we've had in years. Eleanor nodded her thanks, enthused to public praise. As she descended the ladder, she caught sight of Thomas leading several horses down the street for the children's pony rides. He tipped his hat when he saw her, the gesture now familiar and warming. The day passed in a blur of activity. Eleanor helped at Miller's booth, selling candies and small goods to visitors from neighboring towns. By late afternoon, she'd retreated to the store to replenish supplies when the bell chimed. Excuse me, Mississippi. Eleanor turned to find James Wilson standing before her. The eligible bachelor had never before addressed her directly, though his family had traded at Miller's for years. Mr. Wilson, she acknowledged, smoothing her apron. How may I help you? I wondered if you'd made arrangements for the social this evening. He removed his hat, revealing neatly combed blonde hair that contrasted with his sun-darkened face. Eleanor stared, certain she'd misunderstood. Arrangements? An escort, he clarified, his smile confident. I'd be honored to accompany you. The invitation struck her speechless. James Wilson could have any girl in the county. His attention felt like a cruel prank. That's unexpected, she managed finally. Is it? He stepped closer. I've noticed you, Miss Mason. Your quiet dignity. Your talent with that banner. His eyes, a calculating blue, assessed her. You're not like other girls who prattle endlessly about nothing. Before Eleanor could respond, the bell chimed again. Sarah burst in, eyes widening at the scene. Eleanor. Oh, Mr. Wilson. Pardon my interruption. James nodded curtly. Miss Bennet. Sarah glanced between them. I just needed to borrow a ribbon for my dress. For tonight. Of course, Eleanor said, grateful for the interruption. In the back. As they moved toward the storeroom, James called after her. Your answer, Miss Mason? May I escort you? Eleanor hesitated, Thomas's face flashing in her mind. Already have plans to attend with friends. But thank you. Once in the storeroom, Sarah grabbed her arm. James Wilson asked to escort you? The James Wilson? It makes no sense, Eleanor whispered. Perhaps he's finally noticed what a treasure you are, Sarah suggested, though doubt tinged her voice. Eleanor shook her head. Men like James don't suddenly notice women like me without reason. Later, as Eleanor closed the store to prepare for the evening, her uncle Frederick appeared, her father's older brother and one of the few family members who still acknowledged her existence. Eleanor, my girl. Just the person I wanted to see. He beamed, mustache twitching with excitement. Here you've caught James Wilson's eye. Smart match. His family owns half the county. Eleanor's stomach nodded. Uncle, I have no intention. Now, don't be hasty. He lowered his voice. This is your chance, girl. To be settled proper. Your mother would have wanted that. My mother would have wanted me happy, Eleanor countered softly. Frederick's expression hardened. That scarred drifter won't bring happiness. Just more hardship. You mark my words. After he left, Eleanor leaned against the counter, trembling slightly. How quickly news traveled in Whistling Pines. And how easily people assumed they knew what was best for her. In her room, she found an envelope had been slipped beneath her door. Inside was a formal invitation to the social, embossed with the Wilson family crest. A handwritten note read, "I'll await your arrival at 8. J.W." The presumption both irritated and unsettled her. As she dressed in her best blue dress, simple but carefully mended, Eleanor found herself torn between the comfort of Thomas's steady presence and the unexpected attention from a man whose approval might finally grant her a place in Whistling Pines society. What troubled her most was the small, shameful part of herself that briefly wondered if James might truly see something in her that others had missed all these years. The town hall glowed with lantern light as Eleanor approached, her heart beating in anxious rhythm against her ribs. She'd spent an hour debating whether to come at all, torn between her arrangement with Thomas and the insistent invitation from James. In the end, she decided to attend independently, beholden to neither man. Thomas stood near the entrance, scanning the arriving crowd. When he spotted her, relief washed over his scarred features. "I feared you might not come," he said, echoing her words from their first meeting in the town square. Eleanor managed a smile. "I said I would." Before Thomas could respond, James Wilson materialized beside her, resplendent in a tailored suit that spoke of wealth and position. "Miss Mason," he greeted, taking her hand without permission. "You look enchanting. Blue suits you." Eleanor withdrew her hand carefully. "Good evening, Mr. Wilson." Thomas stiffened, his expression closing as he noted the familiar way James addressed her. "Reid," James acknowledged with barely concealed disdain. "Surprised to see you at a social gathering. Didn't think you mixed much with civilized folk." The insult hung in the air. Eleanor saw Thomas's jaw tighten, but his voice remained level. "Wouldn't miss seeing Miss Mason's banner displayed so prominently." James's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Indeed. Now, Eleanor, I believe you promised me the first dance." "I made no such promise," she replied, discomfort growing at his presumption. "Come now, don't be shy." James took her elbow. "Everyone's watching." And they were. Townsfolk had paused in their conversations, openly staring at the unlikely trio, the wealthy rancher's son, the limping shopgirl, and the scarred stranger. "Perhaps another time," Eleanor said firmly. "I need refreshment first." James's grip tightened momentarily before he released her. "Of course, I'll fetch you some punch." As he strode away, Thomas murmured, "Wilson's not known for taking interest in ladies outside his social circle." "I'm well aware," Eleanor replied. "I don't trust his sudden attention." Thomas nodded, relieved she wasn't blinded by flattery. "Shall we find that seat I promised? To watch others make fools of themselves." They settled on a bench near the dance floor, conversing easily despite the curious glances cast their way. When James returned with punch, his smile had hardened to something predatory. "You two look cozy," he observed. "But surely you'll spare me one dance, Eleanor? Everyone's wondering why I've chosen you tonight." The phrasing made her stomach clench. "Chosen me? For the honor of my company," James amended smoothly. "Don't disappoint me now." Reluctantly, Eleanor allowed him to lead her to the edge of the dance floor, where they could sway without requiring complicated steps her leg couldn't manage. From across the room, Thomas watched with hooded eyes. "You're quite the talk of the town," James remarked, his hand uncomfortably low on her back. "The quiet girl who caught both the beast and the prize." Eleanor stiffened. "Don't call him that." James chuckled. "Defensive, aren't we? Tell me, does he kiss with that twisted mouth?" "You're being deliberately cruel," Eleanor said, trying to pull away. "Just curious about the competition." James held her firmly. "Though there's really no contest, is there? What can a scarred drifter offer compared to me?" "Decency, for one," Eleanor countered, finding unexpected strength in her anger. James's expression darkened. "Careful, Eleanor. A man's pride is a dangerous thing to wound." As the music ended, Eleanor excused herself and headed toward the ladies' retiring room, needing a moment alone. Passing the half-open window near the punch table, she heard male laughter and James's distinctive voice. "Easiest $50 I'll ever make," he was saying. Porter bet I couldn't tame the cripple girl by Founder's Day. Said she was too stuck up to give any man the time of day. And, another voice prompted, I'll have her eating from my hand by midnight, James boasted. These plain ones are always so grateful for attention. Might even steal a kiss to prove I've won. Eleanor froze, humiliation burning through her like wildfire. Every suspicion confirmed in the cruelest way possible. She hadn't imagined herself suddenly worthy in James's eyes. She'd simply been a wager, a joke among men with too much money and too little humanity. She turned, intending to flee, and collided directly with Thomas, whose expression told her he'd heard everything. The devastation in his eyes mirrored her own. Time suspended as Eleanor stood frozen, Thomas's gaze locked with hers. In his eyes, she saw not pity but a righteous fury that matched the inferno in her own heart. Eleanor, he began, but she shook her head sharply. Don't. The word emerged strangled. Not here. James emerged from around the corner, faltering momentarily at the tableau before him. His eyes darted between them, calculating. Everything all right? Eleanor drew herself up, hands trembling. I heard you, James. Every word about your bet. Color drained from James's face before he recovered with a practiced smile. You misunderstood. $50, she interrupted, voice gaining strength. That was my worth to you. A joke between gentlemen. People nearby had gone quiet, attention drawn to the confrontation. Now, Eleanor, James lowered his voice, reaching for her arm. Let's discuss this privately. Thomas stepped between them. The lady heard you clearly enough. Stay out of this, Reid. James's charm evaporated. This doesn't concern you. It concerns me when a man treats a woman like a trophy to be won. Thomas's voice remained controlled, but Eleanor saw the tension in his shoulders. James's lip curled. What would you know about it? Think she'd choose you? A scarred nobody with nothing to offer but damaged goods? The insult hung in the air for one heartbeat before Thomas's fist connected with James's jaw. James staggered backward into a table of refreshments, sending punch and plates crashing to the floor. Chaos erupted. Women screamed, men shouted. James recovered, lunging at Thomas with a roar. They grappled, crashing against the wall as onlookers scrambled to give them space. Stop it! Eleanor cried, but her voice was lost in the commotion. Sheriff Parker pushed through the crowd, drawing his pistol. That's enough. The men separated, breathing hard. Blood trickled from James's split lip, while Thomas's reopened scars stained his collar crimson. He attacked me, James sputtered. Unprovoked. That's not true. Eleanor protested. He was defending my honor after. Miss Mason, Mayor Porter cut her off. Ladies shouldn't involve themselves in men's disputes. Sheriff Parker holstered his weapon, disgust evident in his expression. Both of you outside. Now. As they moved toward the door, James's father intercepted them. My son was assaulted by this drifter. I demand he be arrested. Pa, James muttered, it's nothing. It's not nothing, the elder Wilson thundered. These people need to learn their place. Eleanor stepped forward. Their place? And where exactly is my place, Mr. Wilson? Is it to be the subject of your son's cruel wagers? A ripple of whispers spread through the crowd. Mrs. Miller appeared at Eleanor's side, supporting her with a steady hand. What's this about a wager? Sheriff Parker demanded. Before anyone could answer, Benjamin Porter surged forward, grabbing Thomas by the collar. This man has caused nothing but trouble since he arrived. Filling the girl's head with ideas above her station. Thomas shoved Porter away. The only trouble here is men who think a woman's worth is measured by her usefulness to them. Parker stepped between them. That's it. Reid, you're spending the night in jail until tempers cool. Sheriff. Eleanor protested. Stay out of this, Miss Mason, Parker warned. Don't make things worse for yourself. As Parker led Thomas away, James approached Eleanor, voice low. This could all go away, you know. Just say you misheard. That Reid manipulated you. Eleanor met his gaze steadily. I know exactly what I heard, James. And so does half the town now. The social disintegrated in a flurry of gossip and recrimination. Mrs. Miller escorted Eleanor home, her aged face tight with indignation. "You rest," she instructed as they reached the store. "I'll speak with Sheriff Parker in the morning." Alone in her room, Eleanor paced despite her aching leg. Sleep was impossible with Thomas imprisoned for defending her honor. The memory of his controlled rage, his unwavering defense burned like a beacon through her shame. Near dawn, she made her decision. Donning her shawl, she slipped out into the quiet streets. The jail sat at the edge of town, a small building attached to the sheriff's office. Parker was dozing in a chair, keys hanging on a hook behind him. He stirred as Eleanor entered. "Miss Mason? It's not even light out." Eleanor met his gaze. "Release him, Sheriff. Please." Sheriff Parker studied Eleanor with weary eyes. "It's not that simple, Miss Mason." "It is," Eleanor insisted. "Thomas defended my honor after James Wilson publicly humiliated me. How is that deserving of jail?" Parker sighed, rubbing his grizzled chin. "Politics, Miss Mason. The Wilsons have pull in this county. And that makes it right? Makes it complicated." Parker stood, stretching his back. "But between us, Reid's got more honor than half this town put together." Hope flickered in Eleanor's chest. "Then release him." Parker considered her for a long moment, then retrieved the key from its hook. "I'm doing this because I served with men like Reid. Men who'd take a bullet for their principles." Eleanor followed him to the cell where Thomas sat on a narrow cot, head bowed. He looked up at their approach, surprise registering at Eleanor's presence. "Your champion's here," Parker announced, unlocking the door. "I'm releasing you with a warning. Leave town for a few days until things settle." Thomas stood, eyes fixed on Eleanor. "Thank you, Sheriff." As they stepped into the pre-dawn street, mist swirled around their ankles like ghost dancers. Neither spoke until they reached the edge of town. "You shouldn't have come," Thomas finally said. "I couldn't leave you there," Eleanor replied. "Not when you were imprisoned for my sake." Thomas's jaw tightened. Wilson deserved worse than he got. Perhaps. But it changes nothing. Eleanor wrapped her shawl tighter against the morning chill. "The town will always see what it wants to see." "And what do you see, Eleanor?" Thomas's question hung between them, weighted with unspoken meaning. She faltered, unable to voice the feelings tumbling inside her. Fear of rejection, the kind she'd known her entire life, warred with. The undeniable pull toward this man who saw beyond her imperfections. "I see someone who should leave Whistling Pines," she said finally. "You heard the sheriff. It's not safe for you here now." Thomas studied her face. "Is that what you want? For me to leave? What I want has never mattered much in this town." "It matters to me." The simple declaration pierced Eleanor's carefully constructed defenses. Tears threatened, but she blinked them back. "Go to Colton's, collect your things. I'll bring provisions to the livery at noon." Thomas reached for her hand, but she stepped away. "Eleanor. Please." Her voice broke. "I need time to think." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Until noon then." Eleanor watched him walk away, her heart a battlefield of conflicting emotions. By the time she returned to her room above the store, sunrise painted the eastern sky in shades of promise and warning. Mrs. Miller found her hours later at the counter, mechanically recording inventory though the store remained closed for Founder's Day. "You went to the jail," she stated, not a question. Eleanor nodded, not looking up from her ledger. "And Reid?" "Sheriff released him. Suggested he leave town for a while." Mrs. Miller settled onto a stool with a sigh. "And will he?" "I believe so." The older woman watched Eleanor's restless hands. "Will you go with him?" The pencil stilled. "What?" "Eleanor Mason, I've known you since you were 13 years old. I've watched you shrink yourself to avoid notice, to avoid pain." Mrs. Miller leaned forward. "But these past weeks with Thomas Reid, you've stood taller. Spoken clearer. Become more yourself, not less." Tears threatened again. "It doesn't matter. Someone like me doesn't just leave." "Someone like you?" Mrs. Miller echoed. "You mean someone brave enough to face the sheriff at dawn?" Someone talented enough to capture landscapes she's never seen? Someone strong enough to endure this town's cruelty for years without becoming cruel herself? Eleanor had no answer. Life's too short to let others define your worth, Mrs. Miller continued gently. I learned that too late. Don't make my mistake. After Mrs. Miller left, Eleanor retreated to her room. On her small table lay her sketching materials. With trembling hands, she began to draw, charcoal strokes forming Thomas's face, not as others saw him, marked by scars, but as she did, eyes that held kindness and strength, mouth that spoke truth, features that had become dear to her. In the portrait's eyes, she captured what she'd been afraid to name, a look reserved only for her, one that saw past her limp to the woman beneath. A woman worthy of love. The realization terrified and liberated her in equal measure. Noon approached with threatening skies. What had begun as a misty morning had transformed into a slate-gray canopy of gathering storm clouds. Eleanor packed provisions with methodical care, bread, cheese, dried beef, coffee, while her mind raced with unspoken words. You're going after him, Sarah said from the doorway, startling Eleanor. Just bringing supplies, Eleanor replied, securing the package with twine. Sarah crossed the room, taking Eleanor's hands. It's all over town, what James did, what Thomas did for you. People are talking. People always talk. This is different. Sarah squeezed her fingers. Some are saying James got what he deserved. That the stranger showed more honor than our finest sons. Eleanor looked up, surprised. Not everyone in Whistling Pines is blind, Eleanor. Sarah smiled sadly. Go to him, before it's too late. Thunder rumbled in the distance as Eleanor made her way to the livery, package clutched against her chest. Rain began to fall, gentle drops that quickly became a steady downpour. By the time she reached Colton's, her dress was soaked and her hair hung in wet ropes around her face. The livery was empty except for Penny, Thomas's copper mare, saddled and loaded with provisions. Thomas! Eleanor called, pushing wet hair from her eyes. Here. He emerged from the tack room, his own coat already damp from an earlier trip in the rain. He stilled at the sight of her bedraggled form. You're soaked through. It doesn't matter. Eleanor set her package on a workbench. You're leaving then? Thomas nodded, eyes never leaving her face. Heading north. Parker says there's work at the Blackwater Ranch. How long will you stay? Depends. On what? Thomas took a step closer. On whether there's reason to return. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. The town won't change its mind about you. I'm not concerned with the town. His voice softened. Only one person's opinion matters to me now. The rain drummed on the livery roof, filling the silence between them. Eleanor gathered her courage, lifting her gaze to his. I drew your portrait, she confessed, last night, and I realized something while I was drawing. What's that? I've been hiding, Thomas, all these years, convincing myself I was unworthy of everything, because it was easier than risking rejection. Her voice strengthened. I don't want to hide anymore. Thomas closed the distance between them, his scarred hand gentle as it cupped her cheek. Eleanor Mason, from the moment I rode into this town, you were the only one who truly saw me. Not my scars, not my past. Me. Because you saw me too, she whispered. The kiss, when it came, was tender, a meeting of souls who had traveled through darkness to find each other. Eleanor's hands found his shoulders as Thomas drew her closer, the warmth of his body a sanctuary from the cold rain and colder world outside. When they parted, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. Come with me. The words hung between them, a leap of faith, a new beginning. Eleanor stepped back, reality crashing in. I can't just leave. This is all I've known. Is it all you want to know? Thomas challenged gently. Those mountains you've drawn, don't you want to see them for yourself? It's not that simple. It can be. Thomas took her hands. I came to Whistling Pines following a rumor, a story about a kind-hearted woman at the general store who helped injured travelers without judgment. They called you the angel of the general store in Carson City. Eleanor stared, disbelieving. You came looking for me? Thomas nodded, reaching into his pocket. From a small leather pouch, he withdrew a delicate silver ring. This was my mother's. I carried it through the war, through the fire. Never thought I'd have reason to take it out again until I met you. The ring caught the dim light, simple and worn but beautiful in its history. Eleanor's breath caught. I'm not asking for promises, Thomas said. Just a chance. To see those mountains together. The livery door burst open, admitting a gust of wind and rain. Colton stood silhouetted against the storm. Reid. River's rising fast. Bridge'll be washed out within the hour if you're still planning to head north. Thomas's eyes never left Eleanor's face. What'll it be, Eleanor? Stay where it's safe and familiar, or risk finding something better? The choice hung before her like a door to another life, terrifying, exhilarating, unknown. 6 months later, autumn painted whistling pines in golds and crimsons. The church bell pealed across town, drawing curious onlookers to a sight few had expected to witness. Eleanor Mason, in a simple cream dress with blue ribbons, walking without hesitation toward Thomas Reid, who stood tall beside Pastor Evans. Their wedding was small but not unattended. Mrs. Miller beamed from the front pew, while Sarah dabbed at happy tears. Sheriff Parker stood at the back, arms crossed but approval evident in his weathered face. Even old Colton had donned his Sunday best, his wife having pressed it specially for the occasion. Notable by their absence were the Porters and Wilsons, though town gossip held that James had taken to drinking heavily since the Founder's Day incident, his reputation tarnished by the revelation of his bet. Never thought I'd see the day, murmured a townsman as the couple exchanged simple vows. Times change, his wife replied. And people too, when given the chance. Indeed, much had changed in Whistling Pines since that stormy day when Eleanor had made her choice, not to flee with Thomas, as many had expected, but to stay and face the town together. They'd nearly lost their chance. The bridge had washed out minutes after they'd crossed it, returning to town side by side. Some called it providence, others foolishness. But the sight of Eleanor Mason walking openly beside the scarred stranger, her head held high despite the whispers, had slowly shifted something in the town's collective heart. Thomas had found permanent work at Colton's, eventually buying into the business. His way with troubled horses became legendary across the county, bringing customers even from Carson City. Eleanor continued at Miller's, but also began teaching art to children on Saturday afternoons, her quiet confidence growing with each passing week. You may kiss your bride, Pastor Evans announced, his words bringing Eleanor back to the present moment. Thomas's kiss was gentle, reverent. As they turned to face the congregation as husband and wife, Eleanor caught Mrs. Miller wiping away a tear. The celebration afterward was modest but joyful. While music played and neighbors who had once whispered behind their hands now offered congratulations, Thomas led Eleanor away from the crowd. Happy? He asked, his thumb brushing over the silver band now paired with his mother's ring on her finger. More than I knew possible, she replied. They walked together toward the edge of town, where their newly built cabin waited. It was small but sturdy, with large windows facing north toward the mountains. Mountains Eleanor had finally seen up close during their weekend trip after the waters receded. Along the path, they passed the newly erected town sign. The old one had been damaged in the storm, and the replacement bore an addition beneath the town's name, Whistling Pines, where everyone belongs. Mayor Porter had opposed the addition, but had been outvoted by the town council, a change led by Sheriff Parker, who developed unexpected civic ambitions in recent months. Do you ever regret staying? Thomas asked as they reached their porch. Eleanor shook her head. We've built something here, something that matters. She thought of her art students, especially little Mary Porter, born with a twisted foot that had once made her the subject of whispers. Now the girl proudly showed her drawings to anyone who would look, her confidence blossoming under Eleanor's guidance. Besides, Eleanor continued, we can always visit those mountains. They aren't going anywhere. Thomas drew her into his arms. Neither am I. As dusk settled over Whistling Pines, they stood together on their porch, watching shadows lengthen across the valley. Eleanor's limp and Thomas's scars remained, but in each other's eyes, they had found something remarkable, Acceptance that transcended physical limitations, love that saw beyond surface imperfections. Pretty's got nothing to do with the eyes, Thomas murmured, echoing his words from their first real meeting. It's in the way you carry your pain. Eleanor smiled, taking his scarred hand in hers. Their fingers intertwined, two imperfect hands forming something stronger together than either could be alone. In a town that had once defined them by their brokenness, they had redefined themselves through love, proving that sometimes the most beautiful things grow from the most damaged places.